Hello and welcome to The Take with Sophy Ridge, live at 9 here in the heart of Westminster. Well, the Liz Truss era started properly today. The first cabinet meeting, the first Prime Minister's questions, and behind the scenes, putting the final touches to a crucial package of measures on energy. That is going to be announced tomorrow, and it could define her whole premiership right from the very start. Now, the big debate is how to pay for it against a backdrop of spiralling debt and a falling pound. Trussonomics is about to be put to the test. So plenty for us to get stuck into as we bring you takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
There's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain.
Well, the new Prime Minister, perhaps unsurprisingly, disagreed with that.
Well, there's nothing new about a Labour leader who is calling for more tax rises.
The battleground in the coming days and weeks is clear. It's all about the economy, your taxes and how to spend them. And of course, there's never been a more important time to break away from the bubble in this cost of living crisis and speak to our viewers panel. Here they are. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to speaking to you guys a little bit later on the show. We'll also have some top guests for you, including the former Northern Ireland and Environment Secretary Theresa Villiers, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, the man that some have called Liz Truss's favourite economist, Gerard Lyons. And we're also going to be talking to the Conservative MP, Alicia Cairns. Lots more besides coming up on The Take. Good evening. Well, there is now a very clear choice between the two main parties on the big issue of the day, how to pay for an energy plan likely to top £150 billion. Well, Labour wants windfall taxes on oil and gas producers. Liz Truss has ruled it out. And that, of course, could mean a lot more borrowing. But the markets are nervy and the pound is now at its lowest level against the dollar since 1985, all the way back to when a certain hero of the new PM was in charge, one Margaret Thatcher. Well, we'll find out the energy details tomorrow, but already it's been a history-making week.
I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific.
Now it can be confirmed that it has officially happened. Liz Truss is now officially Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation with high-paying jobs, safe streets, and where everyone everywhere has the opportunities they deserve. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills.
I've just realised my alarm is going off on my phone.
Oh, my goodness. What is the alarm for?
You're getting a bit of Dr. Dre. It's just an 8 o'clock alarm.
It is 9 a.m. and we are live in Downing Street, where members of Liz Truss's new cabinet are currently meeting for the first time in number 10.
Can't she see there's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain?
Well, there's nothing new about a Labour leader who is calling for more tax rises.
Well, the Dr. Dre moment, I think, was the standout one for me. But of course, energy prices and how to pay for the package of measures we'll get tomorrow, absolutely dominating the political debate at the minute, including our Prime Minister's questions. There was a fairly heated exchange between the new Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, and interventions from the backbenchers too, like this one.
A pub restaurant in my constituency in Barnet got in touch with me to say they were struggling to find an energy supplier, and the quotes they had got hold of showed that they would be paying a 600% increase in their bill to £320,000. They can't survive that. Will she ensure her plan to tackle the energy price crisis helps businesses in the hospitality sector, which our communities value so much?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. The hospitality industry is vital, and I will make sure in our energy plan that will help support businesses and people with the immediate price crisis, as well as making sure there are long-term supplies available, will help businesses as well as helping individual households.
Well, the person who asked that question was the Conservative MP, Theresa Villiers. I spoke to her earlier, started by asking why she chose that question in particular.
Because I feel that the cost of living crisis and energy price rises are just on everyone's minds. And I received an email from a popular pub restaurant in my constituency just giving me these frankly terrifying figures about what they were going to be asked to pay for their energy. So I wanted to focus on the fact that businesses are finding it tough as well as households.
Yeah, I remember speaking to a pub owner actually on Sunday and just being completely shocked, actually, frankly, by the kind of increases that they were going to be seeing. And what did you make of the Prime Minister's response?
Well, I mean, I welcome the very clear response that the package that will be announced tomorrow will include help for businesses as well as households. I mean, obviously, we don't know what that is yet, but it was really reassuring because, of course, much of the debate is understandably about individuals and families, but we don't want to see sort of mass business closures as well. So we do need to focus on the energy costs that they're facing too.
It's going to be expensive, though, isn't it? Liz Truss has ruled out a windfall tax. Do you think that was the right thing to do?
Well, we already have a windfall tax at the moment, so it's already the case that the big energy producers are contributing to solving this problem. And we have a progressive tax system, so higher earners and companies will all be playing their part in funding all of this. So I don't think it was an unreasonable decision for Liz to say that she wasn't going to introduce a specific new windfall tax, but I feel it's best to wait for the detail in the package to see how it will operate and how it will be funded in detail.
Yeah, we are, of course, all waiting that, aren't we, tomorrow's announcement. But at the same time, if she's not going to go for tax rises, then it looks likely it's going to be funding by a pretty big increase in borrowing. I spoke to Philip Hammond, the former Chancellor, over the weekend, and he said that he's worried the Conservatives' reputation for fiscal responsibility and competent government's at stake. Do you think that's right?
This will have an impact on borrowing in the public finances, and so there are risks. I mean, that was obviously the debate during the leadership election, but this is an emergency. I mean, we haven't seen sort of an energy price shock on this scale since the 1970s. You know, we are seeing Vladimir Putin using energy prices as a weapon of war. And in times of emergency, unfortunately, the public finances are impacted, and there's simply no way to avoid that if we're going to do what we have to do. But I feel confident that our new Prime Minister will be looking very carefully at all the numbers to try and minimise the damage on the public finances and to ensure that we can get them back on a sound footing in the future.
I mean, I guess one way to get it back onto a sound footing would be through taxes, though, something that she said that she doesn't want to put up.
Well, she's clearly ruled out that she's very clear about the tax reductions that she wants to make. So I would suspect there's no sort of flexibility on that. But as I say, you know, I'm sure she and her whole new team will be looking carefully about how this is funded. I'm just interested to know as well, you know, Liz Truss, new Prime Minister, you know, this week, of course, you know, she's been appointing her new cabinet and she's had her first Prime Minister's questions today. What kind of Prime Minister do you think she's going to be? I think she's going to be determined, resilient. She's got real kind of grit, and she is absolutely determined to deliver. So I very much believe and hope that she's going to be able to do that. She faces these incredibly difficult circumstances, not just energy price rises, not just the war in Ukraine, but the aftershocks of COVID on the NHS as well. But I think she performed really strongly at Prime Minister's questions, and she's got a long and impressive track record in government of getting things done. So that's what I think she's going to do as Prime Minister.
You sat round the cabinet table with her. What's she like?
She's very engaging. She's got a good sense of humour, and the years we sat in cabinet together, for much of the time she was doing the DEFRA brief, and I remember her staunchly standing up for the food and drink industry as one of our most important sectors. So she's always been a very impressive figure in government and in Parliament.
You, of course, didn't back her in the leadership race. You went for Rishi Sunak. I have to say, looking at the cabinet appointments, it's pretty clear that she's rewarded those people who were loyal to her. Like, admittedly, there are some Rishi Sunak backers when you go further down the rungs of the ministerial ladders. When it comes to the big decision makers, she hasn't really made the most inclusive cabinet, has she?
She's appointed some incredibly able people to her cabinet and her government. We're a parliamentary party with a great many very talented and capable people. And I think it's understandable that Liz wants some of her key allies in the big positions. And as you say, she's appointed some Rishi backers, and indeed she's appointed people who directly stood against her as candidates in the leadership election.
And then voted behind her, though. So in a way, the people that she relied on for their votes.
I think so, but I think she has got a great team. And that includes Conservative MPs from all wings of the party, and I sincerely wish them well. It just, as we've been discussing, they face an incredibly difficult task, as difficult as any government that's taken office in decades.
Theresa Villiers there. Well, it was pretty clear from today's PMQs that Labour wants a clear dividing line between itself and the government over how to pay for this very expensive new freeze on energy prices. Well, we're joined now by the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Thank you very much for being with us. So what do you want to see tomorrow from Liz Truss?
Well, I do think, and we have had it trailed, there'll be something to match Labour's offer to freeze bills. I mean, we've been quite clear, people cannot pay a household energy bill of £4,000 or £5,000. Now, there are mixed messages and different stories coming out from government, but what we would like to see is the existing package of resources the government's put there, matched with a windfall tax. We believe it's legitimate and fair to take some of that unprecedented profit for the benefit of the nation as a whole. We'd also have benefit from lower inflation. Put that together, and that's how we would fund a 6-month freeze in energy prices and have support for business as well. That's what we want to see. Now, we don't know what the package will be. Clearly, if it is, as one version of the story is, that households will bear all the cost of that, but over a longer period of time, I think that is unfair, and that's a drag on the economy the government will have to consider. And if it's borrowing, well, look, what we've heard so far from Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss is that they believe they can cut taxes, increase spending, and somehow that will pay for itself. I mean, that is clearly untrue, and we know it's untrue from previous actions of former Conservative governments.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you obviously want to see part of it funded through taxation, and you were talking there about, Liz Truss's plan just not making sense. But I guess what they would argue is that the way to growth is through lower taxes. That's what she wants to see, isn't it? And I guess if you're talking about the record, she would also argue, I suppose, that now is a time to try something different, to do something new, to not go through the same tax and spend. Can you see the argument for that?
I know that's their argument, but this is where the battleground is going to be. So, first of all, Liz Truss has been a member of every government over the last 12 years. She bears some responsibility for that. I think it is interesting that their own analysis is that that has been a failure. I mean, they're very clear on that. I know Kwasi Kwarteng's called that Treasury orthodoxy. For most people, that's Conservative orthodoxy. So we both have the same analysis. Things haven't been as they should be. Now, for us, the problem is, fundamentally, there's a lack of growth, lack of productivity in the British economy. Low business investment is a part of that. We know from what George Osborne tried that cutting the headline rate of corporation tax did not increase business investment. We already tried that. We know it to be true. Rishi Sunak, to be fair to him, made this case and was correct in doing so. What we would say is that lack of growth comes from lack of clear policy, lack of clear consistency, no industrial strategy, or it's been tried twice and dropped twice, and that's the wrong message to send to business. We don't spend enough on science in this country, our research and development. It's a much smaller proportion of GDP than any other developed nation. These are the things to look at. And this belief that there's a magic wand of cutting corporation tax, and you can pay for that, as the Chancellor suggested on Monday, by what they call supply-side reforms that will make the economy grow. I'm afraid that is Conservative code for cutting employment rights and environmental protections. It has failed, and it's wrong.
We'll find out, won't we? I guess, whose argument is right in the months ahead, certainly. Liz Truss also wants to look at energy supply and the future of energy too. We're expecting her, of course, to be looking at things like more exploration in the North Sea. Reuters reporting this evening that she is poised to announce more drilling licences in the North Sea. dozens, apparently, more licences for exploration in the North Sea. Is that a good thing in your view?
Well, we'll have to see the detail, because any transition plan for the UK has always had gas as part of that.
At the same time, I understand, you want to see the detail, but we know that this is the road of travel, that this is what they want to go down. She said it before. She wants to see more exploration in the North Sea. Is that something that you would support?
Well, she'll have to prove that is consistent with our climate change objectives, internationally agreed treaties that we have signed up to. She'll also have to explain...
How do you do that, though? How do you prove...
Well, because we have a committee on climate change that has a carbon budget.
You're either in favour of exploration in the North Sea or not.
Well, it's a part of the transition. What we don't know is this new drilling for already found oil fields, gas fields, or is it new exploration? That the timescales of that will determine that. There's also a suggestion of, I'm sceptical that can be done on a timescale consistent with the net zero transition. And if it's a return to fracking...
So just to be clear, if it goes against the net zero targets, then you would be against exploration.
Because not only is that a breach of our commitments, by not sticking to our commitments, we raise the risk, the cost of capital for the kind of investments we need in onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, new nuclear, a hydrogen industry. We lose the jobs of the future, as well as breaching things that we've signed up for. And if it's a return to fracking, as we've heard part of it, look, the best case scenario for fracking, even if people wanted it, and it's clear they don't, was something like 4 billion cubic metres in 4 or 5 years' time. That is in no way going to compensate for the loss of Russian supply to Europe. And quite frankly, I don't think, even our geology and environmental standards in this country, that could be done in a way. So it's the wrong answer.
Some people would say, look, we understand, of course, how important the commitment to net zero is. We understand the need for investment in renewables. But at a time of energy supply crisis, don't we need to look at every option on the table, including in the North Sea, including fracking?
You can build a wind farm quicker than you can get fossil fuels out of the North Sea in a new field.
Shouldn't we be doing both of those things?
Well, it depends. If she can prove that is consistent with our net zero objectives, but if she can't, not only is that the wrong thing to do, it will risk the investments that we most need to see for the long-term future of the country. And I think, again, there's an element of, to be honest, fantasy about a lot of Liz Truss's plans, whether it's on the economy and tax and spend or on areas like this. Now, we need the detail, to be fair to them. But in terms of what I've seen in the Conservative leadership contest, I think we should be worried.
There does seem one of the few things that there is a consensus over is the need to try and act to at least freeze or reduce people's bills in the short term. We also have a crisis in energy supply. Is there a risk that by acting to reduce bills or to keep bills lower than they would be otherwise, we're not incentivising people to cut their usage at a time when it's energy supply that is the issue? I mean, are you worried about blackouts? Do we need to look about rationing?
I'm not worried by that, because first of all, when people say freezing prices at the current levels, there's no incentive to reduce your own consumption. Well, let's be clear that we're freezing them at levels considerably higher. So, the incentive is certainly there for people in my constituency, and I think the nation as a whole. If the government makes the right decisions, there shouldn't be the risk of what you are saying. But, let's be clear, there was a huge drop-off in home insulation installations after 2010. David Cameron cut the green crap. That reduced the ambition of their own policy. You could have taken 15%, roughly out of the demand in terms of natural gas had those decisions not been made. The ban on onshore wind has been counterproductive, and closing the storage facility, and, again, another Conservative decision, really poor decisions that have increased our exposure, but the government can still make better decisions now, and that's what they need to do alongside measures.
Should we be looking at things like they're looking at in Germany, like stopping lighting public monuments or asking shops to shut their doors?
I think there is some benefit in a public education campaign around different ways to reduce consumption. An amazing number of homes in this country don't even have thermostats, and that could relatively easily be solved. But I would worry by talking about that we are, only the government can make the kind of intervention that is required on a crisis of this scale. And there's always benefit in us all living our lives in a more efficient way and using scarce resources as best as possible. That's not an answer to the crisis. This requires real action from government, because that's the scale of the challenge.
OK, interesting stuff. Thank you very much, Jonathan Reynolds, there. Well, we are, as we were just saying, still waiting for the details of the energy announcement tomorrow. So let's talk to someone who perhaps knows more than most what is going on behind the scenes, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, can you shed any light on what to expect? that?
I think at the heart of the announcement Liz Truss will give personally tomorrow will be a commitment that she will ensure that energy price bills are not going to rise substantially from where they are at the moment. Now, where they are at the moment is, of course, pretty much double for a lot of people where they were just a year ago. Nevertheless, preventing them going up from about £1,950 a year for the average household up in the new year to something like £5,000, which is what some people suggest, will be a very big and important step because, frankly, most people can't afford that and there would be tens of millions of households falling into poverty. So that's the centrepiece of what we expect. Now, it's going to be paid for by borrowing. That's the big political difference that exists with Labour, who say that a lot of energy companies should be paying for it themselves from the excess profits that they've been making because energy prices are high. But this package tomorrow isn't all about just insulating people from rising bills. Liz Truss is going to say that you can only offer short-term help, and we're talking about maybe a couple of winters in the first instance, if you reform the energy market. And what she's going to do is promise all sorts of things. You were raising some of them just there with Jonathan Reynolds. Now, that includes potentially more drilling licences in the North Sea, more gas storage, maybe sorting out some of the finances around nuclear power plants, to make the case that you can basically introduce in the next few years a lot more domestic energy supply, so you don't have to rely on the fluctuating price of the international energy markets. Now, the problem with that is that that's going to take a long time before you see any real benefit from it, and until that point, you're potentially on the hook for hundreds of billions of pounds if the pressure from Russia on energy prices continues as it is. So it is a gamble. You might think that Conservatives are uncomfortable with massive intervention causing huge amounts of borrowing. At the moment, they're sanguine because they know it's so important for the public. This is a gamble worth taking.
It does feel like a defining moment, doesn't it, for Liz Truss. Sam, thank you very much for the explanation. You are watching The Take. We're live here in Westminster. Up next, we are going to be taking a closer look at the new Prime Minister's economic approach and trying to add up some of those expensive tax and spending pledges that she's made.
I'm Inzamam Rashid and I'm Sky's North of England correspondent, telling stories from this culturally rich region I call home.
If the Taliban found your family, what would happen?
I think they're just going to straight away execute them.
There are issues of racism in all levels of cricket.
I was on the balcony a couple of times. I was nearly gone.
Football is a joy to watch. When people are disappointed, you can feel the hate.
I've always tried to put people at the heart of the story, like hearing from young women who've been spiked via injections.
I just felt physically sick. That's really in my system.
Men, they want to force you doing something which you don't want to do, just because you're homeless.
We give a voice to communities often unheard and unserved from a region with a distinct history and global impact.
We support communities to grow food in lost and unloved spaces across the city. So our main kind of driving force is to get people growing.
con eso ya podemos ir evaluando entonces cómo el cambio climático va a afectar estos ecosistemas. Y eso cómo afecta prácticamente toda la cadena. O sea, si afectamos a los productores primarios, que son las microalgas, vamos a ver afectado obviamente todo el resto de los organismos.
I'm Yvan Bourgnon, I'm a sailor. I spent half time of my life on the sea. We have a factory who can convert this plastic to energy. And so after, at the end, we can minimize the footprint carbon of the boat.
Hello, welcome back. We are live in Westminster and you are watching The Take. Now, there's a big shift in economic thinking as the new PM takes over in Downing Street. Liz Truss wants lower taxes and supply-side reforms to cut regulation. So far, so that's right. But with huge spending on keeping energy bills down and pledges to boost defence spending as well, she's likely to need a massive increase in borrowing, all as markets get a bit jittery. Well, Gerard Lyons has been called her favourite economist and can perhaps help us understand her thinking. He joins us now. I could see you smile there when I said that you're her favourite. Did you see that as a compliment, or how does that go down, that moniker?
Well, I think economic policies are sound, so I would take that as a positive.
Is there much that you disagree with her on then, or do you think is it the direction of travel that you do?
Well, lots of people are talking about Truss economics, but Truss economics has yet to really be defined. So it's both what she says and also what she does. But I think what's really encouraging is that she wants to really address head-on the immediate challenges. The biggest risk we currently face, in addition to high inflation, is the risk of a deep recession. And the two things that she has highlighted that she will address in the next few weeks, the energy crisis and also reversing the tax increases, are the two single most important issues to not just ease people's worries about the future, but they're the two most important issues to prevent that deep recession. The global economy is slowing, might be difficult to prevent a slowdown, but she's taking full action, in my view, or will do, to address that risk.
So you don't think that a recession is inevitable?
A recession's not inevitable. Look, the two big issues, as I say, the energy crisis. By capping prices, she will take the risk away from people and from firms. The government will take on the risk. So that's an important factor. Also, it will cap inflation and, in turn, inflationary expectations. And then in terms of the taxes, clearly, if we went ahead with the planned tax increases, it's inevitable that we would have a recession. So coming back to your question, a recession is not inevitable, but the world economy is slowing, and indeed the markets are reflecting that as well.
You're talking there about the need to act on energy prices, but also the need to try and keep taxes low as in not raise them more. That surely means we're going to see an awfully big increase in borrowing.
The biggest threat to the public finances is if the economy has a deep recession. So that's what Liz Truss is confronting straight on. So therefore, we should be reassured about the public finances and, in terms of that, the borrowing. If we look at the borrowing figures, the markets, I think, will be reassured by measures on the energy front. That removes the worry about growth collapsing. I think the markets will be reassured by Liz Truss, or indeed Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, today, reaffirming what was already clear, that the Bank of England remains independent. But more importantly, coming back to your question, her fiscal measures are necessary, given the reasons I've mentioned, to prevent a downturn. They're affordable, and they're non-inflationary. Non-inflationary because of the nature of our inflation shock. Our inflation shock has been triggered by supply-side factors exacerbated by poor monetary policy.
Not everyone agrees with that, though, do they? Some people do say that cutting taxes or cancelling proposed rise in taxes would be inflationary. The IFS, for example, Paul Johnson, now is not the time for big tax cuts, which could themselves make inflation worse.
OK, right. In terms of, first, the energy price cap. 2 weeks ago, Goldman Sachs said that inflation would hit 22%. Yesterday, Barclays said, based on fixing the price, inflation would peak at 10%. So that's a big difference. Also, bear in mind that the OBR, the independent OBR, said that 1%, said this back in March, 1% off inflation saves £5 to £6 billion a year in a full fiscal year. So that's very important. In terms of the actual inflation expectations component, what we need to watch is what happens on monetary policy, not just fiscal policy. A clear consequence of what Liz Truss is planning is that monetary policy will be focused on curbing inflation and fiscal policy will be very much focused on stabilising the economy. And tax cuts are not the opposite end of the same seesaw as interest rate hikes. Basically, if taxes go down, that does not mean that interest rates go up. But interest rates will have to go up, as the markets have been saying. And indeed, the markets were saying this way before Liz Truss looked like she would become Prime Minister.
Just want to talk to you a bit about the markets, because it feels like, there is a risk there. You were saying that you think the markets will be, reassured by some of the policies, that you don't think that higher borrowing will lead to alarm. But at the same time, it does feel like that is perhaps a bit of a gamble. I just want to have a look at what's happening with the pound as well, because this is another part of the story as well. I think I have to go this way. There we go. This is the pound falling. It goes back to, as you say, and it's not just a Truss thing. It's gone back, way back to 1964, this graph. But it does just show how low the pound has fallen.
Do you realise what the main story was in Tokyo this morning? The weakness of the Japanese yen, 30-year low. The euro recently is an all-time low. The key story here is the dollar. It's a very interesting one, because the last time the dollar was this strong was August 85. And then what we had was something called the Louvre Accord, stabilisation amongst all the big countries to stabilise it. What's more interesting for the UK is what's happening to gilt yields. And that's an indication of borrowing. Now, gilt yields here, 10-year gilt yields are around 3%. They actually improved today, the gilt markets. So that gives you an indication of the rate at which the UK government borrows.
Yesterday also hit a 10-year high, the gilt yields.
Yeah, but
and also, this is not just we understand that the dollar is strong at the minute, but this is about more than just the strength of the dollar.
Well, let's get back to borrowing rates, because UK government borrows at a cheaper rate than the US government. Also, the maturity of our debt is twice as long as the maturity of German government debt. So that puts us in a very good position. Also, bear in mind that, as I said, if the inflation outlook improves, that improves the borrowing figures as well. What comes back to this is that the markets want to have confidence about the policy. No one should ever be complacent about markets. I've been in markets for 30 years, but it's about explaining clearly what you want to do. So coming back to your question, on the energy crisis, markets, I think, will be reassured on that front. Making the Bank of England really take stock of inflation is reassuring. But then the markets, I think, will take comfort from a fiscal policy that's not just going to stabilise the economy, but it's quite clear that debt to GDP, which is lower in the UK than the other G7 countries, is on a clear downward trend. So it's fiscal discipline, fiscal financial solvency. But the markets, clearly, like anyone, they'll have to see what is actually unveiled. And that's the key thing.
It's pretty clear that you are happy, excited even to see some of Liz Truss's policies going forward. Yeah. She said that she wants to set up a panel of economic advisors to help steer her policy. Are you going to be on it?
Well, she said that the weekend. I don't know. Obviously, it's up to the Prime Minister who's on it. But
you'd say yes if she picked up the phone to you?
Well, it depends on the terms, of course, but the answer is probably yes. But the important thing about who's on it is obviously important. But we need to confront Treasury orthodoxy. Since 2008, trend growth in the UK has been very low. The Treasury says growth is low, more of the budget deficit is structural. A decade ago, they wrongly used that economic thinking to justify austerity, which was wrong. And in the last 2 years, they've used the same economic thinking to justify tax increases. What Liz Truss is saying, let's not be in a hole and dig deeper. Let's actually ask why we can't get stronger growth. Let's get stronger growth, higher wages, and sustain what is pretty good jobs picture at the moment. So let's see what she does. I do think it's a sea change in thinking. And as we've seen today, she believes in it. I think the markets actually will give her a vote of confidence if she does deliver on what she has said.
Oh, well, we'll find out, won't we, in the months ahead.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being on the programme there, Gerard Lyons. Now, former Prime Ministers always say it is one of, if not the most nerve-wracking part of the job, being grilled by opposition leaders and MPs in the House of Commons. It was Liz Truss's first outing at Prime Minister's Questions. Here's what our political correspondent Joe Pike made of her debut.
The anger, the disdain and the contempt we saw between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer has disappeared after months of parliamentary jousts about truthfulness, standards and fitness for office. Today, Liz Truss and Keir Starmer parried each other on policy. The new PM arrived to cheers from colleagues, even though most of them didn't vote for her. Rishi Sunak and his most high-profile supporters were nowhere to be seen. Instead, Liz Truss was flanked by her closest cabinet allies, not a white man among them. Rising energy bills is the issue of the autumn, and today a new dividing line was drawn over how to pay for it. The government want to borrow billions, whilst Labour prefer taxing the profits of oil and gas companies.
Protecting oil and gas profits and forcing working people to pay the bill. She's the fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years. The face at the top may change, but the story remains the same. And can't she see there's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain?
Well, there's nothing new about a Labour leader who is calling for more tax rises. Same old tax and spend. What I'm about is about reducing taxes, getting our economy growing, getting investment, getting new jobs for people right across the country.
And it is not just the tone that has changed, but the language too. Our analysis of Liz Truss's answers features the words energy and the economy a lot, as well as tax. Tax also popped up a lot in Keir Starmer's questioning, as well as excess profits and working people. When Boris Johnson was PM, Theresa May used to shoot spiky questions at him. She seems far fonder of her second successor.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, why does she think it is that all three female Prime Ministers have been Conservative?
It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that there doesn't seem to be the ability in the Labour Party to find a female leader, or indeed a leader who doesn't come from North London. I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the issue is.
But opposition MPs seem keen to toxify Liz Truss as fast as possible.
The Prime Minister may have changed, Mr Speaker, but it's the same old being shouted down by the Tories.
Is she going to be as useless and corrupt as her predecessor, who's rocketed off to somewhere in the Pacific? People in Pontypridd will never forget that she played a key role in a government that failed millions.
Liz Truss did do pretty well today, but it will be more tricky to repeat that performance if her big interventions on the economy and energy bills do not work. Now, sources suggest the Labour leader's team wanted to prevent him falling into the same trap that some say Rishi Sunak slipped into during leadership debates, a mansplaining at Liz Truss. And after today's session, Sir Keir congratulated the PM on her debut. They will be head-to-head again tomorrow, when Liz Truss announces her long-awaited and much-needed support package on rising energy bills.
Well, we've heard and seen plenty from Westminster today. Let's break out of the bubble, shall we, and find out what the most important people, you at home, our viewers, made of it all so far. It's time to speak to our regular panel. Here they all are. Good to see you all. Lovely to see you after the summer break, back hard at work. We've got people from across the UK and across the political spectrum as well. But I want to start off with the cost of living. It feels to me like it's the most important time to really be focusing on what this means to everyone. And I know that some of you have got some stories that you've been sharing with the team. I just want to talk to Andrew first. This is Andrew Farley. You describe yourself as a centrist. You're in North Yorkshire. But on energy prices, you work for a food packaging company, I think I'm right in saying, COVID critical during the pandemic. And you were saying that the government's talking about gas rationing for your industry. Just explain to us what's happening.
So, essentially, aside from the price freeze that the government are talking about on energy bills, the UK rely on a cold winter's day where there may not be much wind. We rely on EU gas for about 12 to 20% on a daily basis. So if the EU haven't got that gas on a cold winter's day, when Putin's already threatening or has turned off the main pipeline, then we won't have enough gas on a cold winter's day when there's no wind. And so it's almost inevitable that gas rationing will occur in the UK for industry, not for the public, for industry.
And just talk to us a little bit about the business that you work for. What is it that you do, and do you use quite a lot of gas then?
Yeah, we do, yeah. So I'm sort of part of my role is responsible for energy contracts. So it's been obviously a very challenging period with the volatility in energy. So it's just a daily sort of struggle trying to figure out how to map out the path ahead. And now, hopefully, the government are going to step in and lower businesses' energy bills for the foreseeable future, which will be a lifeline for many businesses across the country. We've heard all the stories, and ours is no different. So it's really important.
That's really interesting.
The government announcement tomorrow.
Really interesting to think about the business angle to this too. We've talked a lot about consumers, but businesses are really important too. And also schools, which is why I want to talk to you next, Izar. Izar Bhattacharjee, you are a Remain voter, you're in London, but you're also the chair, or not the chair, sorry, you're governor, that's right, aren't you, in a local primary school. And I guess for schools, the bills that are coming when it comes to energy must really be pretty frightening.
Yeah, so I'm our school finance link governor. So I'm in charge of helping make sure that schools got a budget that's healthy, and it means that we can afford to provide the best education for our kids. And if you think about March of last year, that's actually when we got the first big hike in energy prices, and it was a more than doubling of our energy prices then. Schools don't face the same energy price cap as households face, and so right now we're looking at wholesale energy prices, and they're very high, even if they're frozen at this level. And we're about to get our next quote in the next month or so, and we're going to see the real cost of that. And to be honest, 80% of my budget is salaries for staff, and there aren't that many places that you can cut. And so when you see rapidly increasing energy prices, it's a pretty scary situation in the school, and we obviously don't want to make cuts that impact the education of the kids at all. So it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I guess. Are you worried that what we're going to see, not necessarily at your school, but certainly around the country, are positions like teaching assistants going?
Yeah, I think our school is actually particularly well placed just because we've managed to fill our reception role, which for the area that we're in is actually very uncommon. And so if you see the enrollment numbers go down, if you also see the staff salary increases, which I think are great for the staff, but come with no additional funding for the schools, and then you see these energy price hikes, I'm a little bit scared you'll see, for example, teaching staff who might have to kind of be cut back on, or even support staff. And I think all of that could well impact the position of the education we provide.
Really worrying. And of course, it's the personal as well, isn't it? People's personal bills. Hannah Walker, let's go to you next, shall we? You're talking to us from Dorset, and your electricity cost has nearly doubled, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. And I've got some disabilities, which means I use a lot of both electricity and water, and also I live in a place where I only have LPG gas. So my income, because I'm retired, is fixed mostly. I can't really increase my pension, and I'm now getting my state pension. So I have no way of making any more money to pay for the increased costs, and I think that probably applies to a great many people, and particularly those who are most vulnerable.
Really concerning stuff. And well, let's talk, shall we, about the new Prime Minister now. It's been really good to hear some of your experiences, some of your stories, so thank you for sharing them. We can go to Roy next, shall we? Roy Royer. You're a Conservative supporter yourself. What do you make of Liz Truss so far? Are you happy with what you've seen?
Yes, I've been pleasantly surprised, actually. She did very well today, and I was heartened by her cabinet choices, I must admit. So I'm quite pleased with the positions that she's filled, with whom she's filled them.
Well, let's go to our other Conservative supporter, shall we? Dr Paul Blom, who is a Conservative. You're speaking to us from London. I've just been told in my ear that we actually have to go to Hannah next. Not entirely sure why, but Hannah... sorry, Paul, I'm going to come back to you in 1 second, but we are going to go... Hannah's leapfrogged you in the order. Hannah, what do you make of Liz Truss so far?
Well, I'm a Labour voter, so I don't quite see her in the same light as perhaps some of the Conservatives here do. I don't particularly like her choices of in the cabinet, perhaps because I think she perhaps could have gone for unity. Cabinet invited some of Rishi Sunak's supporters. That might have been better, more inclusive. I thought her acceptance speech when she won the leadership was a little bit wooden and stilted, to be honest with you, but a Prime Minister's question, she appeared a bit more in control. She was okay, but I think we just have to wait and see how it goes forward. She doesn't particularly impress me. It's more of the same, really.
OK, well, let's go to Paul now, shall we? Paul, what do you make of Liz Truss so far?
Well, I'm never a fan of her particularly. And certainly during the hustings, I think she said some ridiculous things. So I have my sort of doubts. I thought she came over well actually in PMQs today. I thought she was more confident, more relaxed and less robotic. I actually thought she answered the questions. We didn't get a sort of cabaret as we were from Boris Johnson. I think she was tried to be sort of straight talking, answer the questions and did appear more confident.
Really interesting to hear your views. I'll be interested to hear as well as, you know, the kind of series goes on, whether they sort of shift, if she impresses you more or less. And of course, after we get that news of that energy price announcement too. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, shall we? We're just talking with the panel there a bit about Liz Truss, first impressions. How do you feel she has gone, I guess, in the first week?
Well, talking to Tory MPs today, they were pleasantly surprised by her first outing in Prime Minister's questions. Look, it's no secret, as your panellist said, that there are some doubts that she can be a little wooden. She tried to turn that to her favour during the leadership contest, suggesting that she wasn't as slick as her opponent, Rishi Sunak. But she doesn't have long to create an impression for herself. That's why tomorrow is going to be absolutely key with the energy announcement that probably will be the biggest spending commitment she ever makes. People will be judging her on that because she's got an uphill mountain to climb, as I think we're about to see.
Yeah, we can have a look at some of the polling, can't we? And it really is an uphill mountain, as you say.
That's right. And if we look at this now, what this is a poll taken just before the announcement of who was going to be the Conservative leader and the next Prime Minister. So this is, as it were, the baseline. And look at that. The Labour Party lead the Conservative Party by 15 percentage points. That's a whopping amount. It's bigger than the amount that Boris Johnson beat Jeremy Corbyn by in the 2019 general election. And almost as worrying is you've got really quite good percentage figures there for the Liberal Democrat who could eat into seats, particularly in the south of England. In fact, 43% up here is the highest amount in this Parliament for Labour. 28% is the lowest amount in this Parliament for the Conservatives. As we go on to the next slide, you can just see the trend over time, and that shows you just how much has been going on. Basically, what happened, as we'll see in a second,
Okay, you can be able to go on to the next slide.
Is that round about last October, there was a switch, and all of a sudden you saw that, and it was here. You saw that Labour overtook the Conservatives. Now, that was a point where we started getting shortages, price at the pump started going up. So it's real-life experience that actually informs people's voting intentions rather than anything else. And then all the way through that bumpy autumn that translated into a really turbulent political new year with the Partygate affair and all of that, Labour have maintained a sustained lead, and that has rocketed over the summer. I think the disunity of the Conservative Party really evident in the last few weeks. And I think all of that means that Liz Truss has an enormous mountain to climb. She, of course, told the 1922 yesterday that the party was on election footing. Could it be sooner than we think?
I wonder as well with Liz Truss, because I guess there's two ways of looking at this. And in the one hand, you look at this poll, you think this is terrible. She's got a crisis coming, and the polling shows that the Conservative Party is unpopular compared to Labour. Is there perhaps an argument that the baseline is so low that whatever she does will be seen as better than expected?
Almost certainly. Look, the public, when asked what they think of her, give her a thumbs down on almost every subject by about a margin of 2-1. She can only outperform that. And when she starts spending, and I think she is going to spend a hell of a lot of money in the coming days and weeks, as Rishi Sunak found, that might actually improve your popularity. Now, whether that's durable and sustainable to the point where you might actually reap rewards at the ballot box, we will see. But it is worth saying that all the way along, all the times that we've talked about this, there have been problems with Labour as well. They might be riding high in the polls, but they've still got issues with the over 65s where there's a majority of 2-1 for the Conservatives. You've got the SNP still strong in Scotland, keeping Labour, pushing Labour down there. and not that many people switched directly from the Conservative Party to Labour under Keir Starmer. So lots of work for them to do. So I think Liz Truss has every reason to feel there's all to play for.
Interesting stuff. It'll be a really critical few months ahead, won't it? Sam, thank you very much indeed. Now, we have spent a lot of the show, understandably, talking about the really big domestic challenges facing the new government, but there's also no shortage of issues to tackle on the world stage, not least, of course, the Ukraine war, which is driving the global energy crisis, as well as relations with the EU, the threat from China, food shortages in developing countries. It is a long list. And we're joined now by the Conservative MP, Alicia Cairns, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Thank you for being with us. So Liz Truss's first call was with President Zelensky of Ukraine. You've obviously done work with particularly women in Ukraine as well. What are you expecting to see from the new Prime Minister in terms of that all-important policy?
So I think we're going to see a lot of focus on this kind of narrative about threats. And I think Ukraine and Russia, alongside obviously China, where she's keen to show that she's going to take a strong stance, we're going to see a lot of that. I don't think we're going to see any reduction in support for Ukraine. I don't think we're going to see any change. But I would love to see, as you know, she's announced this reconstruction conference that she wants to do in 2023. That's the right plan. We should always be talking about reconstruction and where we go forward. But I think what we really need to see is a fleshing out of what does Putin must lose mean? Because for months now we heard Boris say it, we heard Liz say it, and I think we'll continue to hear her say it. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like? How much authority and autonomy are we going to give to the Ukrainians to decide what Putin has lost looks like? So I think there's a lot of fleshing out of that question that needs to be done.
It feels to me like we're moving into a new stage of the war almost. It feels unlikely that, suddenly Putin's going to take Kyiv. It also feels unlikely that he's suddenly just going to withdraw. It's almost like we're in a Cold War. He's using new tactics, like cutting off gas supply. How do we react to that?
So I think there's that really murky bit of a war. We get into that real war of attrition. As we go into winter, everything will freeze. And I have, 2 Ukrainian families living with me. Their hope is that they will have success by the time we get to winter because they know that everything freezes then. And that moment of freezing in winter will be a really interesting reset because we will need to look around the world at how much support we have. And it's a real vulnerability point. So I think one of the things I've been talking about is these abstentionist countries who haven't taken a view and haven't taken a side. As we go into winter, when everything freezes, our countries who are currently our allies...
Who are you talking about?
Oh, so if there's countries like India, for example, there are countries, a lot of the Commonwealth countries, countries in Latin America and so on. A lot of them haven't wanted to take positions, same in the Indo-Pacific. We already have them with their positions, but as we go into winter, we could see people who are currently with us but going away, and we need to make sure we keep that support, we maintain that support, and that's going to be a real challenge.
How much pressure do you put on a country like India? I mean, we're trying to sign a trade deal with them as well, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that's an enormous challenge, and I think the Global South, this is what I think... So Liz likes to talk about her network of liberty. That, again, is something we need to flesh out. What does that mean? What does it look like? Is it operationalising the Commonwealth? Is it about looking at these abstentionist countries? She needs to look at how we bring these people into the fold and how we make them work. But these countries don't want to be made to pick. And we have to be very careful. It's the same question when it comes to China. You cannot force these countries to pick. And actually their priority is, in the Pacific, for example, it's about surviving climate change. In the countries in Global South, it's about the famine that's coming and the food shortages. We can't just tell them they must pick a side because we have, particularly when we're not necessarily backing that up with the support to allow them to make that choice. So it's a very sensitive diplomacy. And that's going to be the most biggest challenge, I think, for this government is the nuance of diplomacy. You can't have black and white relationships. You can't compartmentalise things when they're unhelpful. You have to have that complicated discussion that's sometimes quite tough.
And how do you think Liz Truss will approach that?
Well, look, I think Liz has shown that she's willing to be a disruptor and she's achieved some things as a result of doing that. But she's also shown herself to be someone who's listened. So I went to her last September and said I was really worried about the Balkans, and in particular Bosnia, had a list of 13 things I would like to see her deliver. She delivered 10 of 13, and the UK entire policy towards Balkans and Bosnia changed overnight. We've been leading on the world stage on it. So I think when she can see there's an urgent need, she acts and she makes a difference. And she did that by bringing people together. But I also recognise that sometimes playing to the crowd can lead to quite a dangerous position in diplomacy. There are always cameras, lights and action, and that can lead itself to those quick quips that actually are quite dangerous in the long run.
Interesting. You're thinking about, like, Macron, for example?
Yeah, and I think I think that was not a very sensible move. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. If she gave the answer on China, you could understand why, again, you wouldn't want to tie yourself either way. But France is a major ally. We work with them very closely. We've just come through the AUKUS relationship difficulties. And AUKUS was absolutely the right decision. That is, in the long term, one of being one of our key defences.
Okay. Are you worried that we're talking here, just Liz haven't probably explained, we're talking here when she she refused to say whether or not President Macron was an ally. Yeah. Could that damage our relationship, do you think?
So I think obviously it is so important, the relationship between two world leaders, but actually we see this so much in the media where, if this person don't become best friends, there can't be a positive relationship between those countries. But the frameworks and the civil service and diplomatic relations, those are actually the fundamentals and they're not at risk in any way.
Got to ask you, are you going to run for the now vacant position as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee?
So I'm really grateful. I've had a lot of positive conversations with colleagues over the last, 12 hours, however long today is. I've lost track of the day. So I'm seriously considering it. And I think, we need someone who understands these challenges, knows what's under the bonnet and how the engine of the Foreign Office works. And I'm really touched by how many people have reached out. So I'm definitely considering it.
Sounds like a yes.
Look, it's my passion, and I think I can bring that experience of working, countering hostile states, counter-terrorism, and, as I said, understand the Foreign Office. And I think, hopefully, colleagues have seen that I'll work with them.
Interesting stuff. Alicia Kearns, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. Well, that is it for The Take. We will be back next week and every week on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Next up, you've got Sky News at 10. Thanks very much for watching. See you next week.
I'm Yvan Bourgnon, I'm a sailor. I spent half time of my life on the sea. We have a factory who can convert this plastic to energy. And so after, at the end, we can minimize the footprint carbon of the boat.
The inspiration behind our product came from understanding how big of a problem livestock methane emissions were.